Finally a codex so I can do fast melee marines again. Oh.
Trident Wargaming. Build it, paint it, play it.
Good evening, nerds. How are you doing? It's just your boy Scott coming at you again tonight for a solo Trident podcast. I guess this is kind of a, what is that, like a Unident podcast? Just hanging out by myself tonight, me and the cats, and you guys, I guess, doing our little Codex review. You guys probably have checked in on our Tyranids Codex review that I did with my doppelganger, also named Scott, just a couple weeks ago, where we covered off some of the new Tyranid attachments and some kind of cool combos and rules and stuff that were coming out of that book. And now I'm back again, this time only a single Scout, to cover the Space Marine book. Which, you know, I'm sure you guys have heard 1,000,000,010 things about already. That's the nature of Space Marines. But we're going to go over a couple of the detachments in this book. Some kind of interesting combos and stuff that's popping up a lot. As with last time and with all of our future Codex reviews, which should be coming at you pretty fast and heavy now that we are seeing GW kind of pick up a little bit on their release schedule. All of our Codex reviews will be kind of more in this format where we're just kind of covering, I don't want to say the only relevant data in the book, but certainly, you know, just we know that there's a lot of content out there that's already going through these things with fine-tooth combs, covering every single data sheet, every single rule, and everybody throwing their thoughts out there. But we don't really want to get too deep into it because of that. We also are cognizant that as brilliant as some of us are, we are not necessarily the be-all to end-all of judgment when it comes to the competitive state of the game or the narrative state of the game or anything like that. But we do want to, you know, talk about this stuff, and we want to talk about this stuff with you. So we're kind of doing this thing where we're waiting a few weeks after a book comes out, and then we can talk about, you know, what's been popular and powerful and whatever in it, and we can act like we knew what we were going to be talking about all along. So, you know, everybody wins. So, as with the last time, like I said, we are only going to cover some of the detachments in here because I can tell you right now that there is one or definitely two that are not doing so hot, even as the flavor for them is there. And realistically, I think with a few little tweaks, they could become very relevant in your local meta, at your local events, in your local playgroups. And those two detachments that we will not really be getting into tonight are the Anvil Strike Force and the First Company Task Force as well. I know Bill, Trident Bill here, is personally very broken up that the Anvil detachment is not as optimized as maybe it could be. That's very much his style of game. And I know more than a few Terminator heads that are not thrilled that First Company isn't maybe as good as it could be. Again, I do think that those two detachments don't necessarily need a ton of tweaking to become more relevant. But they definitely do need a little bit of help, whether that's changes to their own rules or changes to the units that would most benefit from their rules. We'll see. It is Space Marines, so it's not like GW is going to forget all about it. Hopefully they'll be looking at them, you know, come January or whenever their next balance pass comes up. We also have to be cognizant that the meta changes through time, and there's, I mean, anybody who watches the meta fairly religiously like I do we'll see changes that don't always have something to do with the rules for that particular faction changing. They're just the way that the other factions change around them can affect you. So maybe we'll see some stuff happen there. We will be covering tonight, however, we will be covering the Firestorm detachment. We will be covering the Vanguard Strike Force. We'll be touching on the Gladius, which of course we've all been getting familiar with since the dropping of 10th. We will be covering a little bit the Stormlance, even though it likewise is not doing great when it comes to Space Marine win rates. Right now, Space Marine Codex Space Marine players are not having a lot of fun with that particular detachment because it's focused on units which are almost non-existent in this book and not very good when they do exist in this book. However, we are going to touch on it briefly just because there are definitely some kinds of Space Marines that you might run into out there that can run a very good Stormlance task force, or Stormlance. I'm not really entirely sure what the actual word that they use is. Stormlance task force. No, that was right. There are a couple armies that can run a pretty mean list with this detachment, so we'll cover that off. And of course, last but not least, we will touch on everybody's favorite Ironstorm Spearhead, which I actually think might be the most common detachment now for Space Marines. Certainly one that you guys, if you're not familiar with it already, you're going to get familiar with it. So we'll be touching on those. Yeah, we'll also be covering a little bit of the metadata that's been coming out the last month or so in regards to Space Marines and how they've been doing competitively and, you know, just kind of in our local meta as well. So, where do we start? Do we start with Gladius? Because that's kind of the one that everybody's already used to. Sure, let's do that. Everybody likes the Gladius. We all love it, right? I actually am a big fan of the Gladius for what it's worth. Let me just take a quick look-see-pooksy here. Gladius. Okay, so since the drop of the Space Marine Codex, the Gladius Task Force has actually only been at a very sad 41% win rate across 350-ish games since the book got dropped. That's actually not wildly out of sync with what the Space Marine's generic win rate has been since the Codex drop, which is around 44%. But it is a little low. I wonder a little bit if that has to do with a lot of the players who, or armies that would probably benefit the most from the Gladius Strike Force, maybe occasionally being teched into another detachment just for the sake of trying out new things. The Gladius did just this last weekend, actually, at the World Championships of Warhammer in Atlanta, which is roughly about when I was filming this, just in case you're watching this deep into the future, did actually show up at quite a few of the top Space Marine lists. It is, to be fair, being used a lot still by Black Templars, who are in a whole nother stratosphere compared to generic Space Marines, but of course that also goes to show you that maybe you don't always need gigantic changes to go from zero to hero in the meta, because the Black Templars, of course, they're different than Space Marines, the generic Space Marines, but they are not that different from generic Space Marines. Anyhow, so they're getting a lot of use out of it. I know both Dark Angels and Blood Angels and Space Wolves also make decent use of the Gladius Task Force. And I also think that GW did kind of make a great pick when they put the Gladius Task Force as the index detachment that they gave to Space Marines, because it is generally and generically the best kind of all-rounder force. I legitimately do think that if you're looking for the ideal toolbox for Space Marines, most Space Marines anyway, Gladius is not a bad way to go. The Aggressor brick with Biologus and Fire Discipline is, or Captain, you could go with Grab's Captain as well, or both even, is like honestly a terrifying thing for anything in the meta to still go up against. And they do have a lot of great tools in there between advance and charge and fall back and shoot and charge and advance and shoot, and the way that their their stratagems interact with those abilities, like the ability to put any one unit into any of those doctrines on a given turn, and then also combining that with squad tactics, which is the stratagem for moving d6 inches when somebody comes within 9 inches of you. All of those give a huge amount of flexibility to how your Space Marine force moves around the table, which, to be honest with you, when you have the raw stats that Space Marines do, is just awesome. Competitively, you will get a lot of, or you will find a lot of success if you can find the right combination of units to use with the Gladius. It is honestly a good detachment, even as right now its win rate could be a little better. Again, I do think that has some meta considerations to be made in there, or to be considered there. But I also am heartened that, there are very good players out there who are still playing Space Marines right now, generic Space Marines in the Gladius Strike Force detachment, and having some success. So be aware of it. I would say it's probably next to the Storm Lance in very specific occasions. It is the most explosive damage that you can get in an infantry-based Space Marine army, which is still like a fairly common way to run Space Marines. I would say that the Iron Storm that we're going to touch on a little later is definitely the most explosive, but that list naturally, or that detachment naturally lends itself towards vehicles more, obviously, so that's a different sort of list. If you're running infantry, though, this is the best way to get your killing power maximized, at least within generic Space Marines, which, again, I'll probably be reminding you guys a million times throughout this cast. We are focusing on generic Space Marines here. I'll reference Black Templars, Dark Angels a few times in the cast, but those guys will get their own codexes, and we will cover them when they come out. So, but anyway, right now, Gladius Task Force. Again, the big trick that you, of course, have to watch out for is that aggressor brick with fire discipline. It's also being run a little bit here and there with, say, like Hellblasters. I have seen, it was a couple weeks ago, somebody actually did a fire discipline Biologus with a big brick of Eradicators, which actually, like, if you know that your meta, or like for an event or your local meta or whatever, is incredibly deep on monsters and vehicles, like, I can kind of see the use of that, like a big Eradicator brick being run with fire discipline. I don't know. I'm not gonna poo-poo it. That was actually on a list that did fairly well. I think they finished top 3 at a decently sized event. So the fire discipline enhancement is bonkers good, especially in combination with the other things you can get from the Gladius Task Force units and stratagems and stuff. I guess for what it's worth, in case anybody doesn't know, like, I should break down the combo. Fire Discipline is an enhancement, which again is usually being put on an Apothecary Biologist and stapled to aggressors, but it combos off by basically hitting what I call the golden combo of 40k right now, which is managing to pair lethal hits and sustained hits and 5+ crits. In this particular case, the sustained hits is being provided by the enhancement itself. Lethal hits is usually provided by the Apothecary Biologist, although you could run it with Hellblasters and use a regular lieutenant to get lethal hits. And then you use the I can't remember the exact name of the stratagem, but Gladius Task Force has a stratagem which they can use to proc the 5+ crits. I think it's when they're in Dev Doctrine, right? Let me double check here. Storm of Fire. Oh no, that's not it. The Fire Discipline itself procs the 5+ crits while you're in Dev Doctrine, along with sustained hits. The stratagem Storm of Fire actually just gives you ignores cover and an additional point of AP while you were in Dev Doctrine, which is very relevant to the aggressor combo, because of course aggressors dump a ton of shots out, but they don't have a ton of AP. If you're running this kind of thing with Hellblasters or with certainly with Eradicators, the AP and ignores cover are less relevant, though not necessarily irrelevant, depending on your target. But the idea is just to dump like a hilarious amount of shots, or in the case of Eradicators, just considerably more than you were expecting shots onto a target that they're just not going to make enough saves through and you're going to blow something up. The reason it works so well with aggressors is just how many shots they can put out that with 5+ lethals, and then of course lots of crits and possibly rerolls from Oath of Moment. That's where things can go crazy. For what it's worth, with the Eradicators, they're probably comboing this with full rerolls to hit all the time when they're shooting at vehicles, monsters, things like that. So that's why that would work really well. Hellblasters is, again, a great target for it as well. I'm sure people have found others. I think those are the 3 main ones that you want to look at, though, if you're running it. The Gladius Task Force also does have a very good stratagem for melee units, which, again, most of the time is going to be aggressors for them, to give them a lance and an extra point of AP. That's probably one of the better strats you can find for increasing your melee damage output in the entire Space Marine Codex, so you make good use of that. Both that and Storm of Fire are also battle tactics, which is very good to combo with your captains to get those for free. And of course, through all of these detachments, we'll have Armor of Contempt as well, of course, as a battle tactic that they can lean on. Anyhow, we don't need to spend all night on Gladius Task Force, but the important thing is that Fire Discipline combo is literally by itself capable of carrying some armies. And certainly the Gladius Task Force offers a toolbox which is effective for a lot of other reasons as well. Specifically when we're referring to movement, which a lot of Space Marine armies do struggle for. So the ability to get around the table being kind of a skill which wins a lot of games. Gladius Task Force, great place to go for to get it. The next one we're going to look at, I think, is actually going to be the Firestorm detachment, which is interesting because the Firestorm Assault Force got a ton of good projections when the original reviews for this codex dropped. It was definitely looked upon as maybe definitely a contender for the best detachment in the book. A lot of folks thought that it would be the thing that kind of carried Space Marines, who at the time were actually pretty much in the same spot they are now, kind of mid to low 40% win rate. A lot of people thought it would be carrying them, certainly up to 50, maybe even into a really successful win rate like 55 plus. The Firestorm focuses itself a lot on transports and transport-related shenanigans, but its actual detachment rule itself is very, very strong entirely by itself, and that is that it grants assault to all of your ranged weapons, and also +1 strength to those weapons if you are within, I want to say 12 inches? Yeah, 12 inches. Both of those buffs are great. The assault buff especially is great, though, because, again, leading back to the Gladius, movement is not something that a lot of especially infantry-based Marine armies don't do very well, and Marines in general aren't necessarily known for. Assault gives you the ability to get a lot more movement on the table. In this case, at all times. It also, of course, opens up a lot more play around actions or being able to do some of those secondaries a lot easier. And, of course, the extra point of strength is relevant a lot of the time. There are quite a few Marine units who have strength values that are right at or near breakpoints that are commonly relevant in 40k right now. So that extra point of strength is basically a +1 to wound a lot of the time. Also, for what it's worth, a couple of the Marine transports, namely Land Raiders, Repulsors, and to some extent Impulsors, are all considered reasonably viable right now. Some are straight up considered very good, in fact. And the fact that Firestorm Assault Force has, I think, 3 stratagems which are specifically keyed to getting a little bit more out of your transports or out of units that are in your transports goes a long way towards making that seem a little bit more appealing. And then, of course, it's got what I think quite a few people rightfully believe is one of the higher damage based stratagems in the book, which is the immolation protocols that pop up in here. It's 2 CP, but it basically gives torrent weapons in a given unit devastating wounds for a phase, which is very, very strong, especially because Space Marines do have access to a couple of pretty decent torrent-based units, and that can kind of really swing a very important shooting phase for you. All of this kind of comes together to give you a detachment which, like, I understand why people would felt that, and some certainly do still feel, will have a ton of success. The results have not been there. If you are an Edmonton Oilers fan, the Firestorm Assault Force is very much the Edmonton Oilers of the Space Marines right now. Lots of things say it should be good. Everything goes wrong, though. Okay, maybe it's not that bad. It's not Edmonton Oilers bad right now. But maybe it's got a better future coming up. Certainly, if it plays like the Oilers, one would hope so. I'm starting to feel really sad all of a sudden. Anyway, so let's just take a quick look at some win rates here for Space Marine. Since the Codex dropped, Firestorm has had a 43% win rate, which is marginally better than the Gladius. It kind of mirrors that across some of the other Space Marine factions like Black Templars and Dark Angels and stuff, where like it's kind of in the same win rate class as the Gladius. It doesn't really seem like anybody's getting particularly more out of it than Space Marines are, at least not relative to Gladius or some of the other detachments. I think part of that is that will Space Marines have good combos with their transports, which was part of the draw of this. They don't necessarily have the ability to multiply that unit many times over the course of the army, which is usually a staple of transport-based armies, or that at least ones that do well, is the redundancy of being able to not just have a combo, but have that combo 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and Space Marine units are just naturally expensive enough that you don't get to use them in that fashion very often. This is not to say that the Firestorm Assault Force can't do well, just that it so far has not quite found its niche. And again, it kind of does feel like one that maybe this is looking for just a little tweak in the meta, or maybe I think maybe for the Firestorm closer to a little tweak in points costs to maybe catapult it up in the rankings. Certainly there are no shortage of people out there who'd love to play with their torrent weapons, their transports, their melta weapons, which of course naturally synergize very well with the assault and +1 strength within 12-inch buffs. Firestorm also does have a stratagem for +1 to wound if you're within 6 inches, I think, of your opponent. Yeah, and that works shooting or assault. So, close range fighting is quite prioritized in this particular detachment. So all of those things kind of come together to suggest that success could be near, but it's not quite there for this yet. But you should be aware of it because the hype was real, and I can understand why. And maybe it won't be long before we're all complaining about Salamander's players taking over the world. One thing that is also to keep in mind for the Firestorm is that almost all of its stratagems, 5 out of 6, are battle tactics. So again, this is a detachment that can get a lot of mileage out of the free use or free stratagems from captains. Definitely flexibility is an option. It doesn't have raw speed like you might think, but it does, between the transports and the assault keyword, have more speed than you might expect for a Space Marine army to have. So it's definitely not something to write off, but at the moment we just aren't quite seeing results yet, and I don't know off the top of my head, I cannot remember a Firestorm Assault Force Space Marine army winning an event recently, at least not anything GT size, that's for sure. To be fair, Space Marines aren't winning a ton of those anyway, but when they are, this isn't really how they're doing it. So take that as you will. But again, it could change. This is definitely an entirely usable detachment. It just maybe needs a little bit of a tweak, either personally or in the meta. So we'll see. A detachment that I had some hope for, and I think a few other people had some hope for before there was much for leaks or previews for the Space Marine book, was the Stormlance Task Force, the White Scars detachment. this is kind of one of those detachments that you just, it makes you shake your head a little bit about GW. The way they structured the Space Marine Codex is that there's, of course, very few mounted units in it, period. There is literally a single bike unit right now. Maybe Invader ATVs count as mounted instead of vehicles. I, off the top of my head, could not tell you. But in any case, we don't have a lot. We have a single bike-mounted character, the Chaplain, who I'm sure everybody's very familiar with from 9th, but of course is not getting quite as much love in 10th because his rules are kind of weird. He benefits, or he buffs his squad in shooting, despite the fact that he himself is very much an assault-oriented model. And, oh yeah, look at that. Invaders are mounted. Yeah, so there just is not a ton of mounted units in here to make use of buffs, and the mounted units we do have, the Outriders and the Invader ATVs, are not great. The Invader's fine, but it's not something to write home about. Outriders actually, like, again, are not bad, except that they just don't seem to have a role. They don't kill anything. They are reasonably fast and somewhat tough, but again, they aren't so tough that they are actually a difficult thing for your opponent to remove if they want to, and they aren't so fast that they're, especially with their large bases, that they're going to be able to go wherever they want. Yeah, they're just kind of lacking a home, like in the list right now. They lack a role. And again, we only have one character to really work with. So when you build a detachment around mounted units, yeah, it's not going to go great. But I do want to touch on the Stormlands because, of course, there are two armies that are Space Marine adjacent, specifically Space Wolves and Dark Angels, who can make use of the rules from the Stormlands, which benefit mounted units. Specifically, of course, the Space Wolves, who are having just a wonderful time with this detachment. And so if you are out there playing Space Marines or worried about playing Space Marines, you guys should be aware that the Stormlands is the thing that you may run into, just probably not from this actual book. So the Stormlands, its primary benefit, which is just very good and it is not locked to mounted units, is just all units can advance and charge. This, again, going to the Gladius and the Firestorm. Speed is good. Speed wins games. Advance and charge is an awesome rule. Everybody knows this. Army-wide, no conditions. It's not locked to anything. Awesome. That's a great start for the Stormlands. It then goes sideways, like I said, for Space Marines, because again, they can't use a lot of what's in this in an effective way. But Thunderwolves definitely can, and so can Ravenwing units, who, you know, aren't getting quite as much love as, say, Thunderwolves are, but are still actually pretty decent units, and probably about to get better with the Dark Angels Codex on the horizon. The Stormlance does still give you Armor of Contempt, of course, just like all the others. It gives you a very powerful defensive buff for mounted units specifically, which is only a single CP and is also a battle tactic called Ride Hard, Ride Fast, which is grants a unit both -1 to hit and -1 to wound against them. That's a huge buff, obviously, especially for a tough unit like Ravenwing Bikers or Thunderwolves already, which, you know, is going to help them cover that hopefully only one turn before they can slam into combat. It has a stronger version of the squad tactics from the Gladius, where when an enemy unit moves within 9 inches of you, you can make a normal move. The squad tactics for Gladius is only a d6-inch move unless you're in Tactical Doctrine. This one does not have any such rider. It's got a powerful assault, or a powerful bonus for your shooting that grants you assault, and a bonus sustained hits while shooting, which can be handy for quite a few units. This one is not locked to mounted, so, like, again, some of the units that came up before, like Aggressors or Hellblasters, to some extent Centurions, Devastator Centurions, obviously, Eradicators, all of these things can benefit a lot from assault and sustained hits 1. Again, only a single CP and a battle tactic, so that's quite handy. It does have a kind of interesting 2 CP stratagem called Full Throttle, which is locked to mounted units. It allows them to do an automatic 6-inch advance, or not, sorry, it's not locked to mounted units, but it's mostly locked to mounted units because mounted units are vehicles. It's automatic 6-inch advance. However, it's 9 inches if the unit is mounted compared to a vehicle, which would only get 6. You're usually locked in this edition to 6 inches on your advance, even if you're very fast. So being able to do a 9-inch one can be a bit of a surprise for your opponent, I think, in at least a couple of situations. Again, that is a tricky one because it's 2 CP, but there's times where that 2 CP will score you some points. Could be a game-winning 2 CP, so it's a nice thing to have in the bag. And finally, they have a very good battle tactic for, again, mostly this is for Thunderwolves. Single CP for a mounted unit. When they go to declare a charge, it gives them full rerolls for that charge and the Lance ability for the following combat phase. Obviously, that's great. Huge buff to your damage. Very strong bonus to getting your unit into melee. So the abilities that you get out of this are pretty good. And like, you might be thinking, well, Space Marine, the generic Space Marine book does have some good combat units like Aggressors or Blade Guard, certainly a few of their characters, that could still make use of these bonuses, or at least some of these bonuses, and that is true. But in general, with 10th edition being an edition that is struggling a little bit to make melee as relevant as 9th did, and the fact that a lot of the Space Marine melee units, pretty much all of them actually, are quite slow, this detachment just doesn't quite measure up to, say, like the Iron Storm or the Vanguard, which we'll be looking at following this. And it certainly actually doesn't even, at least in win rate terms, match up to the Firestorm or the Gladius that we've already reviewed. Right now, the Stormlance for generic Space Marines is literally only winning 25% of its games. Now, in fairness, it's only, on StatCheck, we only have 25 games for tournaments registered so far, so that is a very tiny sample size. But the fact that it is a tiny sample size when, say, Iron Storm has 350 or Gladius has 350 registered, it also tells you that players are not leaning into this. And again, having a lot of its strength locked to mounted units that are not relevant in the generic Space Marine Codex is a big reason why. I don't know. If you're a Space Wolf player, though, you love this. You love this detachment. And I know at least 1 or 2 Dark Ages players who do too. And again, like I said, I'd imagine it stays that way. It is honestly not a bad detachment. It's just not a good detachment for the book that it's actually in, which is classic GW, to be honest with you. Anyhow, be aware of it. As a melee Space Marines player, I would love for this to be changed in the future, or for things to change around to make it better. Maybe. That's all I can tell you. We'll keep our fingers crossed. Maybe, hopefully, Anyhow, we're going to move on to what I would consider probably the best all-round detachment in this book, and that's going to be kind of maybe contentious for a few people. But I genuinely do think that this is the detachment that will help you win the most games. However, it is not the best attachment for blowing your enemies up. In fact, it's probably the worst attachment for blowing your enemies up, now that I think about it, in the book. But as the Vanguard Spearhead detachment, this is the flip side of the Stormlance detachment. The Vanguard Spearhead is an extremely well-written detachment, in my opinion, because it is clear that it still leaves your army with things that it can't do while giving you a nice suite of tools to accomplish goals. It makes you think in a very specific way to try to win games, and it does give you the tools to do that, but it doesn't just, hand you a hammer and tell you to just go blow up all of your opponent's stuff in 2 turns and then win the game, which is not how I like to play 40k, and I don't like 40k to be played that way. Anyhow, the Vanguard Spearhead is also the detachment I'm most familiar with, so there's your bias warning. I played it, I want to say probably 80% of the games that I've played as Space Marines in this edition, because I didn't play my Space Marines a lot before the Codex dropped. But anyhow, probably most Famously, this was the detachment that John Lennon used to finish second at the World Championships just recently here with his Ultramarines, and it does pair well with that style of army, which we'll touch on as we go down what this detachment does. The generic basic rule of the detachment is just giving your units, all of your units, -1 to be hit, and the benefits of cover. If they are being targeted from more than 12 inches away. This is a nice defensive benefit, although to be honest with you, a lot of the units that Space Marines use do want to clear the gap between them and the enemy and get within 12 inches anyway. But it is handy. It is especially handy versus lists that, of course, want to pelt you to death while you're still far away, which, to be fair, Space Marines can struggle with at times. So it's a nice bonus, if not like as good of a bonus as, say, army-wide assault weapons are. It has a couple of spectacular enhancements. Probably the absolute best one is just a very generic enhancement to give to a character, which gives them and the unit that they join infiltrate. So this lets you infiltrate a big scary something right up in your opponent's face. Most commonly it's been used for aggressors or like Deathwing Knights when being played with Dark Angels, but it can be used for like anything. You could, if you weren't running Stormlands, you could run Vanguard Thunderwolves, you could run Vanguard Black Templars to put, I don't know, a big brick of Hammernators or Crusaders. You could use a shooting threat when you want to do Hellblasters or something like that. You can do that. It's a generic stratagem that goes on an infantry model, so it's very, very effective. There's a million good ways to use it. They also have an excellent Ghostweave Cloak enhancement, which makes the character who takes it into a lone op. Lone ops are spectacular. And Space Marines do actually have a few characters who are really good candidates for being turned into a lone op. Terminator characters have Deep Strike. Gravis characters tend to be very tough, especially, of course, the Gravis Captain. I saw somebody even do this with a Librarian to kind of have like a bit of a shooting threat. I'm not sure that's the best way to do it, but it's certainly an option. It's just a nice and actually fairly cheap, I think it's only 15 points or so, enhancement. And then we've got some others. We've got Phobos model can do some... can make him and his squad make normal moves when enemies come within a certain range. Oh, sorry. No, they can move, shoot, move. My bad. I haven't used that one yet. It is a good ability. It's just it's stuck to a Phobos model, and Phobos models aren't used in that kind of move, shoot, move sort of way very often outside of Eliminators who can do it already. And then it does have a Vect enhancement. To say something is a Vect ability kind of is nomenclature from 9th edition, actually kind of earlier, really. It's the ability to increase the cost of an opponent's stratagem after they use it by 1. Again, like all things that adjust the cost of stratagems, this is locked to battle tactics, but it's a handy ability to have. People take Calidus Assassins probably 50-50 just for that ability, and in this detachment you just don't even need to. You just need to pay, I want to say 30 points is the cost of that enhancement. All of those enhancements are quite handy. They are toolbox type enhancements for the most part, which I like. The stratagems work much the same. They have a sticky objectives stratagem, which is spectacular. It's actually slightly better because it even leaves a little mortal wound bomb on the objective as well to kind of protect it from very, very small units, I guess. They have a wonderful ballistic skill increasing stratagem, which increases your ballistic skill and your AP a little bit. That is basically like the only damage increasing ability they get. And it is not quite as strong as some of the other ones, but it is there. They do have the ability to slightly increase the power of their shooting. I think it's also locked to outside of 12 inches of them. They have to be targeting something from more than 12 inches away. But it is a nice bonus. It is there. Of course, Armor of Contempt, the ability to redeploy a unit, like pick up a unit and then bring it back in your own turn. They get to do that with 1 to 2 units a turn for a stratagem, which is very, very powerful, especially if you are using a few Phobos units, because that's how you get to pick up 2. So that kind of is that secret speed sort of way of increasing your board control that you can do. They have a precision in combat stratagem, which is less good, not because precision's not good, but because the stratagem costs 2 CP. It does give precision to the whole squad, but you can also get precision on just your character for 1 CP, and oftentimes some characters have a lot of melee output, enough to pick up, for example, an enemy character, especially if it's just a little buff character. So you can just spend less CP. But anyway, if you really need to precision a whole bunch of enemies, you do have that option. So like this particular detachment, it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have anything terribly explosive that jumps off the page at you as, oh wow, that's great, I'm gonna absolutely just pick up my opponent's 3 biggest units with that stratagem or that combo or that enhancement or whatever. It doesn't really have that. Probably the closest you get to that is just the ability to infiltrate something big and scary, which, you know, is effective. But it has a bunch of little tools with relatively little overhead or like requirements that you need to do to use them. And those are very useful for an army like Space Marines, where the units are naturally pretty good already, just stat-wise, but they have a hard time always getting to where they want to go. They have a hard time putting enough units on the board to fulfill all the roles they need in a given mission, things like that. And that's where Vanguard finds its stride. It is ostensibly the Raven Guard focused detachment. And it's nice to see them finally getting a little love, I guess, even if it took until it wasn't locked to Raven Guard. Right now, I believe the Vanguard Spearhead, it is the highest win rate among all Space Marine detachments. That's not much to write home about, because that is a 50% win rate. But that's good, you know. It's across 112 games it's been played so far. It is pretty effective in most other Space Marine types as well. Dark Angels have had a pretty good time with it. Not quite as good of a time as they have had with Ironstorm and to Gladius. Black Templars are having success, like I said, with pretty much everything. They're actually having the least success with Vanguard Spearhead, which is kind of funny when I consider just what I would do with it. But and Space Wolves here, let me take a quick look. Yeah, they're doing about 47% with the Vanguard, so they're doing okay. Again, they probably prefer things like the Stormlance. But anyhow, generic Space Marines, 50% win rate. Again, that doesn't sound great, but it's actually the best that Space Marines are doing right now. I am hopeful that this remains relevant even as the game changes around Space Marines, because it is a cool way to play them. It is a rewarding way to play them. If you can get good at playing this kind of game that Vanguard Spearhead makes you play, you will always be good at 40k, because it teaches you skills and it rewards you for skills that are just generically good to have in 40k. And that's kind of been my joy of playing with it, is reminding me and even still teaching me new ways to kind of go about that kind of style of play, that kind of board control, awareness kind of style of play. So I love it, and hopefully it'll stay relevant. It certainly is getting noticed. It's been getting noticed more and more and more as the weeks have gone on since the release dropped. And yeah, so check it out. Give it a few games if you want to give it a try with, obviously, again, it is generally an infantry-focused army. If you want to play vehicles, there is a different detachment that you might be familiar with, and we'll be talking about them next, and that is the Ironstorm Spearhead, which, again, at the drop of the Codex was a detachment which everybody was pretty jazzed about, and I think very understandably. If you are looking for raw power, I think that this is probably the detachment for you. Obviously, it has a focus on vehicles, but again, like the other detachments, it is not locked to them. There are other units that can benefit from being in this, just probably not as much as vehicles can, let's be honest. But the good news is Space Marines have lots of great vehicles. In fact, some of their best units are vehicles. They're 50% vehicle themselves, as they would say. So the basic detachment rule of the Ironstorm Spearhead is just a once per phase reroll for a single hit, wound, or damage roll for each model or for each unit that you're running. Obviously, that synergizes better with kind of the same with Eldar, who have a similar detachment rule. That synergizes best with units that have a low number of high quality shots or attacks in general, which is why vehicles are naturally lent to that, because a lot of vehicles do have, I mean, they might have a lot of shots nowadays, but you know, it's going to be a lot of unimportant little shots from bolter type weapons and little grenades and stuff, and then a big massive scary cannon. of some sort. So that's just a nice little detachment rule. It is not the reason to run this detachment, though. The reason to run this detachment is a combination of the enhancements and the stratagems. Wow. The enhancements especially actually were the thing that sold me on this, even as there are some awesome stratagems too. The main thing here is that there are 2 enhancements in this detachment which are old school 9th edition style auras. Auras are amazingly powerful because of their ability to benefit multiple units, and a lot of characters and buffs and stuff in 10th edition don't do it, which is part of GW's streamlining of the rules, is that you now only benefit either one unit or probably even just your unit. 2 of these enhancements say, screw that, we're going back, we're kicking it old school like 9th edition. They're locked to, I believe, a Tech Marine. Nope. One of them is locked to a Tech Marine, the other one is not. But they are both auras, and they benefit every vehicle within 6 inches. One of them gives all of those vehicles lethal hits, which, again, when you consider if this is buffing multiple vehicles, probably have multiple weapons, this is an exponentially large amount of shots that it's getting that. The other one is the ability to fall back, being eligible to shoot even if you fell back or advance this turn. The big one about that is that it's not one or the other, it's both. You can fall back and shoot, you can advance and shoot. This increases the speed of your army and protects you against just getting, bad touched by combat, to kind of limit your shooting a little bit. You don't need to worry about that. You just have this character stand in the middle of your parking lot of hilariously powerful Space Marine tanks and say, there's nothing you can do about it. I'm going to get my shots no matter what. They do have fairly reasonable price tags on them. I know the lethal hits one is, I think, 40 points, which is pretty steep. But again, the power level is bonkers. And those aren't the only good enhancements in here. You also have a 4+ Feel No Pain, which is very cheap. It is only it only benefits the model who takes that, but it is a good way to keep an otherwise fragile, let's say, Tech Marine, who are very good at combo with this army. Helps keep a Tech Marine alive in the middle of your force. Or you also have the Adept of the Omnisci enhancement, which lets you zero out the damage for one attack that gets through your save for a vehicle within 6 inches of the guy carrying the enhancement. Again, very powerful for stopping, a knight from hitting you with a +8 damage shot or whatever. Might keep a vehicle alive. Definitely is going to help keep a vehicle alive. Might give you an extra turn or two to get your ridiculous firepower off. The enhancement suite for this detachment is bonkers good. They could take away all the stratagems, and I think that the Ironstorm Spearhead would still be playable just with those. But they're not going to take away the stratagems. Don't worry. They are still in there, and there's some real bangers in there. There is, of course, Armor of Contempt, just like always, but it actually probably gets a little bit more play in this detachment because of the fact that so many vehicles have a 2-up armor save, which combined with their high toughness and wounds values makes them very hard to bring down. And just the nature of dice rolls is that the higher your save is, the more mileage you're going to get out of those, effects like Armor of Contempt, which are basically just boosting your save even more. This just keeps you immune to even more weapons, or nearly immune. So very good ability there. Probably the biggest explosive damage ability of it is the Mercy is Weakness stratagem, which is also a battle tactic, although to be fair, free stratagems don't get quite as much use in Ironstorm because they come off captains who cannot obviously lead a unit of vehicles as much as they might like to, but it is a consideration if you are, say, running Gilman. I think Gilman can do that, right? Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe I'm thinking about somebody else. Yeah, no, he can. Gilman, one unit within 12. Yeah, 1 unit within 12 inches. So if you're running Gilman, that's an option. Anyhow, the Mercy is Weakness stratagem gives you sustained hits, and if you're a vehicle, I believe below starting strength? Yes. You have to be below starting strength, so like wounded at all. You get sustained hits and 5+ criticals, which, again, going back to Gladius, you'll remember that golden combo. Sustained hits, lethal hits, 5+ criticals. Well, the enhancement gives lethal hits to everyone within 6 inches of the Tech Marine who takes it. This gives you sustained hits, and the 5+ criticals, all you needed to do was have a vehicle suffer any amount of damage at all, which they probably will. Suddenly you get that golden combo off, and for some vehicles, basically any type of gladiator, repulsor executioner for sure, even really both repulsors, land raiders, like all these, I mean, this could go off on a vindicator. That would still be nuts. So just an immense amount of damage out of that stratagem, especially in combination with other things here. Again, only 1 CP. It is a battle tactic. That is your pride and joy when it comes to doing damage with this particular detachment. But we also do have a few other toolbox kind of things. Unbowed Conviction, 1 CP to ignore any modifiers for one of your units. This is incredibly important as a tool for getting around some of the nastier units to fight in the game right now. Deathwing Knights, Avatars, Catan, things that have damage, things that have -1s to wound. Also things that are looking to slow you down. If you've got a slower unit like a lot of Space Marine units, and you're worried about Night Spinners, Unbowed Conviction. If you're worried about Battle Shock even, you can use Unbowed Conviction to keep your OC. These are all very handy abilities, or it is a handy ability to use for a variety of situations, is what I should say. And it is available to you for 1 CP. So it's a great toolbox piece, as is Power of the Machine Spirit. This one does require you to have target a vehicle that has been reduced below half strength, which is harder to do because, of course, you may die when you're reduced to less than half strength, and then it can't use the stratagem anyway. But it does allow you to shoot back at a target that just shot at your vehicle, which is always the shoot back stratagems probably don't get enough respect in the game right now for how powerful they are. They are great big red flashing buttons in any detachment that have them, that can be very, very, very powerful for kind of switching up the game state at any given time, and especially on units as powerful as Lancers or Repulsors or Vindicators or whatever that you might be spamming in this army. That's a very good ability to have. We have the good old-fashioned Vengeful Animus, which is the ability to automatically explode, do your deadly demise when you die. I feel like this, I've talked to a lot of people, this should be a generic stratagem. I'm annoyed that it's not, because I love vehicles exploding. I think things exploding in this game should just happen more. So good to have in there. Situational, obviously, but I do want to see more of it. And then finally, for those who are running more Dreadnoughts, which of course are very good in Space Marines, the Ballistus and the Redemptor are great. The Invictor probably doesn't get enough love. The Brutalis even is doing all right. You have the Ancient Fury stratagem, which is targeting a walker and gives them a bonus to their move, toughness, leadership, objective control, and +1 to hit. In the book, it actually also says save. I believe that's been errated, partially because all of those units except the Invictor have a 2+ save already, and so boosting their save doesn't do anything. But I believe it got errated anyway, so we can ignore that part. But bonus to your move, toughness, hit rolls, OC, leadership, all that's good anyway. Again, it's going to be situational that you do or don't want to use it, but when you do use it, you're going to be getting a big buff out of it, because it's going to be highly relevant to your game state. So, again, all of these 1 CP, a couple of them battle tactics, even if that's not as relevant in this particular detachment, but really the thing that sets this thing off is the incredible enhancement suite, combined with the fact that the units that are benefiting from this detachment are already good. And we can see that in both the play and the win rates. For the Space Marine Codex, since it dropped, the Ironstorm Spearhead has been the most popular of the detachments, not by much. 350 games. Gladius is second at 346, so they're both pretty popular. But the Ironstorm does have a 48% win rate, which is a good couple percent over the average for Space Marines. The Ironstorm Spearhead is likewise doing great for both Dark Angels, which I actually think it's probably their winningest. Yep, they've got a 52% on both the Ironstorm and the Stormlance, so those are tied for their winningest detachment. Black Templars are getting a wicked good 62% win rate off of the Ironstorm. I think Space Wolves are even doing pretty good with it. 51%. They like the Gladius a lot more, but it's an option for them. Hell, even Blood Angels are probably doing fine with the Iron. Yeah, look at that. The Blood Angels, who are in an awful spot right now. My wonderful Blood Angels are picking up 52% win rates with Ironstorm Spearhead. They are almost certainly playing almost no Blood Angel units in that army, but that is not the point. It is a good all-round detachment. It is explosively powerful for sure. It is definitely not a subtle detachment. Probably sounds a little hypocritical of me to be singing its praises right now after just telling you that the Vanguard is amazing and you should play it because it teaches you very relevant game skills. The Ironstorm doesn't, but it does blow things up. And that is still one way to win the game. So I can't really speak too negatively of it. It is the one that does that the best. So if you're looking to blow things up, especially with vehicles, it's slam dunk. Play the Ironstorm. And you should be aware of it because you're going to run into people who do play it, because it is just that good. So yeah, that is your rundown on Space Marine detachments that are relevant right now. Again, probably the Vanguard and the Ironstorm are going to be the ones you're going to see the most in competitive play. The Gladius is still very relevant, and the Firestorm is making a case for itself. So, those are detachments that will show up. They just aren't having quite the same level of success. And of course, the Stormlance is relevant if you have some local Ravenwing or Space Wolf players. Units to watch out for that are relevant across multiples of these detachments are things like the Gladiator Lancer and the Repulsor for their just raw damage output. Aggressors are central to pretty much every infantry-based Space Marine army right now. They are usually being used in a dual kind of melee and range threat fashion because they are good in melee, and with certain buffs, like for example what you get in the Gladius, they can also be very good at range. They're oftentimes paired with the Biologist for lethal hits. If somebody's running Ultramarines, they're almost certainly going to be paired with Marinus Calgar because he gives them advance and shoot and charge and fallback. Like, they can just do whatever they want on any given turn as far as movement is concerned. And he also gives you CP, and he also gives you a couple of models in the squad that have 4+ invulnerable saves, which they lack, so they've got some bullet catchers. Anyway, he's a wonderful complement to aggressors, so that's very common to see. You will see Eradicators, who are still, for their price, very good at picking up enemy monsters and vehicles and providing that kind of level of threat. And then you're going to see various suite of Phobos units. Eliminators and Infiltrators are certainly the most common right now. Infiltrators because they can infiltrate, and also because they provide the 12-inch bubble of deep strike denial, which is very handy, especially against a lot of redeployment and scouting and deep striking, which is happening in the game right now. Eliminators, because they're a little bit cheaper, they've got the move, shoot, move. They, of course, are, these Phobos units are, of course, much stronger and better in the Vanguard detachment, where you can also be picking them up to redeploy them on any given turn. But they kind of provide you a little bit of a mission play aspect that you desperately need in Space Marines, because a lot of your units are very expensive and need to be doing work on the table in a damage capacity, and therefore can't just babysit objectives and stuff. Lieutenant with Combi Weapon is another one, the Lone-Op version, I think one of the only Lone-Ops that Space Marine get without any riders. They have several, like Tech Marines and Robot Gilman, who are Lone-Ops if they're within 3 inches of a certain other unit, but just a no limits Lone-Op. I think the Lieutenant with Combi Weapon is the only one you got. That's pretty much the reason why you take him, because he's a Lone-Op and he's fairly cheap. He does give you rerolls to wound on one objective, which is kind of nice. Shrike, Kaiban Shrike. You'll maybe see him pop up in some armies as well. He is also a Lone-Op, actually, a special character, to be fair. But he is not only a Lone-Op, but a Lone-Op who grants his Lone-Op to his squad, which basically has to be Vanguard veterans who are not a bad melee unit. So that is another unit which you will occasionally run into. After that, in Space Marine armies, what are you going to run into? Terminators of various types. Pretty much all the Terminators are pretty good right now. And Hellblasters, they're pretty common. They're not as common as some of these other units, but they're around. Infernus squads are certainly used in Firestorms, generally because they want to be proccing the dev wounds off them. They're also obviously a big Overwatch threat, a bunch of flamers. Inceptors, can't forget the Inceptors. Inceptors might be probably the strongest Space Marine unit all around right now. 3-inch deep strike, or can deep strike within 3 inches, very powerful ability. Combine that on fairly durable bodies. They are Gravis Marines, T6, 3 wounds, and fairly good guns. Come in 2 varieties, both plasma and bolt. These units are getting used quite a bit in pretty much every army. There is no detachment which Inceptors are bad in. There are some they are slightly better, but they're mostly kind of fire and forget type things. They don't require a lot of support to do what they want to do. So you should be aware of them and know about what they're looking to do to you, and probably be bringing your own infiltrators or other things to try to keep them away from you, because the ability to deep strike within 3 inches means that they can pick up a lot of stuff that would normally be hidden. Redemptor Dreadnoughts, as I talked about, and the Ballistus Dreadnought are both pretty good fire support platforms. They don't quite have the raw efficiency of things like Gladiator Lancers or Repulsors, but they are still very tough for their cost, and they do still provide good guns. And then probably the only other thing I would think about is like the Land Raiders. Land Raiders are being used as both gunboats and assault delivery systems right now. They are obviously a little bit better in the Firestorm detachment than some other detachments, but they are just generically good as well. You just need to have the right units for them. You might see Vindicators, you might see Blade Guard. These units are certainly passable. Blade Guard pair well with a lot of Space Marine characters, probably mostly with the Judiciar to get fights first. But you know, they can go with a lot of things and still be good at their cost. Company Heroes are kind of making a bit of a push right now. They are a generically tough unit. I don't know that they really do anything other than not die very easily, but that is something that can be beneficial unto itself. If you've got a spare captain like Uriel Ventress, it's a great combo to put in with them. And then, you know, you might see some niche units pop up depending on the specific detachment they're in. Some of the Stormstrike Speeders are kind of making a push nowadays. I mentioned Vindicators. Whirlwinds are showing up in lots of lists. They are just generically good because it's indirect, and you don't need indirect right now, but you're certainly a lot happier with it. So let's put it that way. So these are kind of the units that you're going to see Space Marines play with on the table. Some units are using the Impulsor to get some units around. Intercessors are not the worst battle line unit in the game. They're not the best either, but they're usable in certain armies for sure. We have 4 types of intercessors now. Some of them are going to be good. You just have enough of them, eventually you'll hit with something. The assault intercessors actually do have decent damage output, even if they are not particularly durable. Regular intercessors have sticky objectives, which has its advantages, and heavy intercessors are very tough for their cost. No Space Marine list tends to really dig heavily on these because they just don't have the points for it, but it's an option that some of them run. Some of them have done pretty successfully even. I know Morgan Smerrick in Calgary, I think, and maybe Saskatoon as well, has actually had quite a bit of success running more than a single squad of intercessors in some of his lists, some of his Ultramarine lists. So don't overlook them, but at the same time, don't try to plan around them. Anyhow, so that's kind of your rundown on the Space Marine Codex, just over a month out from its launch. Again, all of the opinions that have been stated here were opinions that I clearly had the day the Codex dropped. I knew everything that was going to happen. Obviously, I just am a bit of a farseer in that particular way. But my third eye is also telling me that some of the Space Marine stuff in here that maybe could do with a little love, we'll get it soon. And hopefully also Melee will come back with a vengeance, because God, I need my Blood Angels to be good. Anyhow, so that's your Space Marine Codex review. Thanks for coming out tonight to hang out with me. It was good to go through it, and like, even when Space Marines aren't wickedly OP, they're gonna be around. So like, everybody can benefit from knowing a thing or two about the Space Marine book and how things are going with it. So hopefully you've been able to pick up a little bit tonight, if you weren't already, religiously following the tournament scene. But it's just an ever-evolving thing right now with the way that the meta is adapting and changing week to week and month to month. Anyhow, so I do want to give a quick shout-out to our Trident subscribers, the guys who are keeping people like me here talking about codexes. That'll be Frederick, Chris, Ed, Tyler, and Dustin. Thanks, guys. Whilst everybody who is listening to this podcast is here with me in spirit, you guys are actually inside me, if you know what I'm saying. And also, I wanted to throw out a special shout out to good old Netter Brian, who is providing some wicked shots that you guys will be able to see in the clips, like the clip art for this particular episode. He's got some of the prettier Space Marines among people we know. Everybody who knows me knows I love my Space Marines, but they also know that I can't paint worth a damn, even as I try to. So we definitely didn't want to use my Space Marines for this particular episode. If you have not gotten enough Space Marine content, you should absolutely go check out on our Trident pages the Badab War 2.0 campaign we're going to be running next year, early next year. It is entirely focused around this codex that I talked to you guys about tonight, and the detachments and the units in it, along with a whole slew of Crusade rules, which cost me way too much of my life to write. So you guys should come join that, hang out with us, learn about it, and hopefully be thrilled with it, and maybe even win some games with it. We will be running that starting January 20th, so you've got a little while to sign up, but don't wait, because spots are going quick. So if you want to live all things Space Marines, that is your best way to do it in the next little while. And I guess we'll see you guys, probably in a week or so. Bill can't keep me off the podcast for long. Even when he tries, I just work my way back by myself, as I am doing tonight. So I will pick the handcuffs again if he resorts to that. So anyhow, hope you guys have had a good night with me, and I want to say thank you again to everybody. Peace and love. See you all very soon.
Did you plug the Patreon? We need to plug the Patreon.